answer me honestly. How often do player characters in your tabletop games actually die? For me personally, it's pretty rare. Back when I ran more 5e, well, that system has all kinds of ways to make sure players can avoid hearing the phrase, "Here's a new character sheet." Turns out it's hard to kill fantasy superheroes unless you really stack the deck against them. And in many of the systems I prefer to run, death isn't even a concern unless the players choose to give their characters their final moments. Typically because it would be the most narratively interesting and not because a math rock said, "Nah, you're dead." Quite frankly, for a lot of games, that's how I like it. There are so many more interesting things to do to characters than just kill them and then have to wedge a new character into the group. But, come on, level with me. There's something missing, isn't there? The thrill of barely scraping through a battle, the excitement of knowing that if you aren't careful, a single trap or ambush would spell almost certain doom, the fear that can only be brought about with dice rolls that clickety-clack with the weight of your character's very life dependent on the outcome. Now, if you heard that and thought, "No, that sounds awful," then maybe this video isn't for you, and that's absolutely valid. These games aren't for everyone, though I would encourage you to watch on if curious, because these kind of games can actually be really fun and narratively rewarding. And now, if you're already sold on games that want to kill you, you can just skip to the next chapter to learn about the specific games. For the rest of you, let's talk about why this kind of titterpigging can be fun. We've all at least heard about old school game masters who pride themselves on just how lethal their games are, putting a new notch in their DM screen for every player character they've killed. I've also seen a lot of pushback to that mentality in recent years. There is the notion that killing off a character that a player is really invested in because of a few bad dice rolls isn't satisfying, and hey, a lot of the time I agree. If I'm running an epic years-long fantasy campaign and there's a character with a backstory intricately tied to the whole narrative, the big bad is their former best friend and all that, wouldn't it suck if a few bad rolls killed that character off just a few sessions before the final confrontation? And now we don't get any payoff after years of that character's journey, and instead a new character has to be thrown into the party for the last few sessions? Now, I know there are folks out there who are like, yeah, that's just how it goes. And like, if you like that, no shade. Play the way your group likes to play, but that isn't fun or satisfying to me. Also, if your response is, well, they could just resurrect the dead character, well, I rarely play games with resurrection mechanics because, honestly, if I'm playing a game where players are gonna die, they're probably gonna stay dead. I mean, I've got a whole video that is basically me complaining about resurrection and trying to make it way harder. So yeah, killing characters can suck, but it can also be a lot of fun. When you build a campaign around the idea that it will be quite lethal, it shouldn't be fun in spite of that, but at least partially because of it. How is a very real chance of a character death anything but a fun-killing punishment? Firstly, because it is oddly freeing when you think about it. I find that the more likely death is as an outcome for my character, the less I tend to worry about it. This character is probably gonna die one way or another, so why not take some big risks? And you know what happens when PCs take big risks? You get wild, epic moments sometimes. Or funny stories about how you tried to outrun a boulder. The other reason these games are so fun is the thrill of actually surviving. Holy crap, we did it! I was one hit away from certain doom! And don't even get me started on advancing in levels. You've never been so happy to get a few extra hit points. Not to mention a new spell or ability. These aren't just fun extras anymore, but hard-won rewards for beating the odds. Every new item and ability is something that are going to increase your chances of survival. But chances are, eventually your luck will run out. You might believe this requires a complete rethinking of how you as a player invest in your character. After all, if you think of a backstory and make connections, you won't want to see them die, but that's the thing. Half of the excitement comes from being at least a little invested in them. If you think of a character as completely disposable, roles aren't going to be tense. You need a balance of being invested in your characters, but also being open to the very real possibility that any session could be their last, but maybe not. they might survive, and that will only be exciting for you if you are invested in them. I mean, yeah, these games are much more lethal, but it's simply a much bigger looming threat, and not a certainty. Well, probably. If this helps at all make sense, I'm sure many of you have heard of Pokemon Nuzlocke runs, where you play a Pokemon game and are only allowed to catch one Pokemon per area, and if that Pokemon is knocked out, you have to set it free because it is dead. People enjoy it because it suddenly adds an exciting tension to battles. You have to both think more carefully about how you fight, but also be willing to take some big chances, and you'll be ecstatic every time those big swings pay off. Furthermore, you end up being even more attached to the limited Pokemon you have because of what you've been through with them and how few you get. In fact, one of the rules of most Nuzlocke runs is that you have to name every Pokemon you catch to help make sure you get attached to them, which can make losing them hit even harder. But it is that risk-reward gameplay that makes this kind of play so fun and alluring. These Pokemon are made more special because you could lose them at any moment, and it makes scraping by with just a few health thrilling. Okay, for those of you who weren't sure if you want to play a lethal Titterpig before, I hope that helps explain it. Obviously, these kinds of Titterpigs aren't for everyone, and even if you like them, they aren't how I would want to play every or even most campaigns. I just hope you can see how they can be incredibly engaging and fun. If you still aren't interested in a game where your precious PC could meet their ultimate demise, I throw not one bit of shade your way, and I appreciate you for hearing me out. For the rest of you, enough waiting. It's time we go over some of my favorite lethal games. Let's start off with one that isn't too gritty and grim because, frankly, just because these games are deadly doesn't mean they have to be dour. Also, as the name might imply, EZD6 is also incredibly easy to learn and play. Created by the delightful DM Scotty, EZD6 uses just a few 6-sided dice. When you act, the GM will give you a difficulty between 2 and 6. If the player rolls a d6 equal to or higher than that difficulty, they succeed. Your character has no stats or skills, just descriptions of a few things they excel at. If what you're doing relates to one of the descriptions, you get a boon, which means you get to roll a second d6 and take the higher of the two results. If there's an added difficulty to the task, like fighting in darkness, then you might roll a second d6 as a bane, taking the lower of the two. A boon and a bane cancel each other out. What makes this game so lethal is the fact that almost every character will have 3 health, with the Berserker having 5. Most attacks in this game deal 1 hit, though some deal 2, and some very deadly traps may even deal 3. If your character hits 0 health, they are dead. That's it. No death saves. However, this isn't quite as harsh as it initially sounds, as your character has a few fail-safes in place. First, if you are hit, you get to roll your armor or miraculous save, which are assigned via your class. Roll that number or higher, and you -1 from a hit you are going to take, which often means taking no damage at all. But uh-oh, it's your last hit and you missed your armor save by 2! Well, your character also has a resource called Karma. You start with 3 at the beginning of a session and gain 1 for every failed roll you make. You can spend Karma 1-to-1 in order to increase any die roll, except if you rolled a 1. So suddenly, that 3 you rolled for your armor can be boosted to a 5, and you live. But what if you rolled a 1, or didn't have any Karma? Well, then you've got your hero point, of which you have 1 every session, and which allows you to re-roll any dice roll, even those pesky ones that Karma can't affect. And you can buy more hero points for 5 Karma too, just in case. Now, if you've been blowing through your Karma, or are just too unlucky with some rolls, well then, it's curtains for you. There are a ton of other reasons to check out EZD6 aside from the fact that it is pretty lethal, like the fairly open magic system where you can increase the power of a spell but at the risk of hurting yourself, and the fact that there is no character advancement. Yeah, I just said that having no leveling up is a positive, because it's all about the magic items and the stories you tell. And frankly, the system is so simple it would be easy to add in your own leveling mechanics if you really wanted. That's part of the joy of these systems. That also means you could make this game less lethal if you wanted without much hassle. Highly recommended. I mean, all these games are, or I wouldn't be talking about them. Speaking of talking about them, let's talk about the next ones. Shadowdark and 5 Torches Deep. I'm grouping these two together because they are both cases of, what if D&D 5e but simpler? And I don't mean simpler like, ooh, is 5e too complicated for the little babies? Simpler as in just way more streamlined and less to manage and learn. Frankly, they both have a bit of feel like 5e meets advanced D&D or 2nd edition in some ways. Kind of. Both of these games do away with all the classes in favor of just 4 classes, consisting of a person who likes to fight, a person who likes to sneak, a person who likes to magic, and a person who likes to pray. 5 Torches Deep gives these 4 classes variety by giving each 3 subclasses that just give different bonuses at level 3, out of a total 9 levels. Shadowdark classes gain random traits every other level instead of more structured level advancements like 5 Torches, so that's where you get the variety there. Plus, it goes as high as level 10! Ooh! Also, 5 Torches Deep has 4 races to choose from, Shadowdark has 6, but honestly, you can insert any custom race you wanted without any trouble. Though 5 Torches Deep is the more old school, with races having class and ability score restrictions based on their races. Both games simplify item limits with load and FTD and gear slots and Shadowdark, which honestly is just better than weight limits. I don't care if it's less realistic, it is just so much easier to track and makes keeping track of that stuff interesting, strategic, and fun. Both games also place a bit of emphasis on survival in an unforgiving world, though oddly enough, the one that puts way more emphasis on torches is Shadowdark, actually having torches last for 1 hour real-world playtime. Beyond that, despite their many similarities as simplified 5e systems, each has a different feel. Shadowdark is all about the crawls, dungeon crawls, hex crawls, and pub crawls. You think I'm joking, but I'm not. It has a more structured play with turn order taking effect the entire game, which really helps every player get time in the spotlight. Plus, you keep track of playtime, rolling for random encounters while dungeon crawling, using a pretty simple but effective random hex crawl for world exploration, and after an adventure using a literal pub crawl mechanic to determine how much XP each player gets. More elements of Shadowdark feel somewhat gamified with a ton of roll tables. 5 Torches Deep, conversely, really captures some of my earliest titterpig memories of playing 2nd edition D&D, with a lot of the streamlining of 5e. It feels less like a gamified simplification of 5e like Shadowdark, and more of a gritty paring down of the rules. It is, in my opinion, the more Spartan of the two. This is pretty immediately evident when you see 5 Torches Deep is only 49 pages long. But the real reason why we're here, how deadly are they? Well, Shadowdark is the more immediately deadly, where when your character hits 0 HP, you have 1d4 plus your Constitution modifier rounds before you die. That can be as few as 1 round. To survive, you either need to roll a 20 on a stabilizing check, or an ally has to make a 15 on an intelligence check, which for most characters will be a less than 50% chance. If you drop in Shadowdark, there's a good chance you'll stay dropped. 5 Torches Deep, despite being described as grittier by extremely handsome and witty people, is actually much more generous at first glance. See, if you drop to 0 HP, your character has 1 minute or until the end of combat, whichever is longer. In that time, if another character succeeds an ability check to heal you, I assume the standard DC 11 as they don't say, or heals you with an item or spell, you get to roll on the injury table, where if you get a 20, you'll be just fine, 14 to 19, you'll have disadvantage on everything until you rest, and literally every other result is awful. Lose limbs, lose ability scores permanently, or on a 1, just kidding, they were too late, you are dead. Good lord, if you go down, the chance of you suffering a permanent negative is like 65%. Imagine if you drop multiple times during a campaign. It might not be the most lethal, but after rolling on that injury table enough, you might be begging your allies to just let you roll a new character. It is hard to imagine how a game could be any more harsh than that. Name your character if you wish. It will not save you. That's a direct quote from the character creation section of Mörk Borg. By the way, it's Mörk Borg, not Mörk Borg. That's what the little umlaut over the O does to the sound. Ooh, see? Okay. If you've been around the TTRPG space long enough, I'm sure you've heard of Mörk Borg. It's a game where your character will die. You might lose multiple characters in a single session if you're unlucky enough. It is a game that is so steeped in dark and edgy iconography. The graphics are brutal like a death metal album cover. The descriptions are full of despair and dread. Everything paints the picture of a disgusting, doomed world full of people marching toward inevitable oblivion. And as your players lose characters both in an instant and over agonizing fights for their life, you'll all be laughing and having a heck of a time. Seriously, don't take it too seriously. Mörk Borg might present itself as edgier than a knife store, but the sheer inevitability of death really takes all the pressure off and lets players just jump headfirst into everything. It's based on d20 rolls like D&D, but with only 4 stats, and you have no guarantee any of them will be positive given their random generation. Your health? Also randomly generated. You might literally have 1 HP when you start. The rest is shockingly simple. You've got weapons, some abilities, and maybe a spell. The average difficulty of a roll is 12, and with the average ability score being 0, that means that yes, your average chance of success is less than 50%. So typically, if you're rolling to hit a monster, 12 or higher. If you're rolling to avoid getting hit, because the GM isn't rolling crap, you best roll a 12 or higher. Now, with you possibly having so very little HP to start, if you do take a hit, armor can reduce your incoming damage a little. If you get to 0 HP, you roll 1d4 for what is called a broken roll, with 1 to 3 showing how severely you've been hurt, and a 4 being instant death. Of course, if you go beyond 0 HP into the negatives, there is no broken roll. You just die. Just like that. Don't worry, you have omens, which, like Easy D6's Hero Dice, will allow you to re-roll a die, including that defense roll you failed that got you killed. And hey, sometimes you can scare the enemies away, as various conditions will cause the enemies to roll morale, and if they fail, they're out of here. But still, you are probably going to die. Thankfully, the devs have a webpage that instantly rolls up a new character for you. It's called the Scumbirther, because that's what you are, scum. But hey, maybe your character will survive and grow and level, and in Mörk Borg, that is super exciting! You can actually gain levels indefinitely, as each level has the possibility of gaining HP up to a max, and gaining ability scores, or losing ability scores. Yeah, but you can just keep leveling up forever. That is, until the world ends. Yeah, that's a mechanic in the game too. So really, one way or another, your character will die if you play long enough. And honestly, there's so much freedom to just go wild and have fun in that inevitability. Charge into danger with reckless abandon. Cast spells whenever you can. Oh, did I not mention that crit failed spell rolls can result in some really wild, gruesome consequences, like all of your teeth falling out or just getting eaten by a monster? So just live life to the fullest, for however much life you have left. And honestly, isn't that a good lesson to learn for real life? Okay, maybe not to that extent. But hey, still, I hope I've maybe got you a little interested in at least one of these lethal games. Dying is an unfortunate and heavy part of our real life, so it can be kind of freeing to take away its power in our little fantasies, to play in a world where we don't have to fear death, so long as we have a fresh character sheet ready to go.